So, we go into this election. Now, the election is called very early in 1890, and Blair gets more than a little criticism for feeling that he's calling this election because, again, the lumber operations, especially in Northumberland County, are a big deal in this election. It's felt that he's calling this election so early because he figures a lot of those loggers are up in the woods. They're not going to be able to get out. They're not going to be able to vote. So he's got kind of the inside track here. Well, whether it goes that way or not, and here's where we're at. Early on, and we have the election being called. So all four of these guys are saying that basically the government has no regard for the North Shore and its interests at this time. So they're running an opposition, and they're going to go and get a fair shake for the North Shore, for Northumberland County, once they go there, once they get in. So Burchell says himself, my own family, my own operations here have been really hurt by the policies of this government. And so, we've had to operate in a reduced capacity. So, this is one of the reasons why I'm going there. Johnny O'Brien says, listen, I'm not much of a talker, you know what I mean? I'm not somebody that's a great speech maker, but I'm a worker. And, you give the opposition ticket a majority, you help us form a government, and things are going to change. So, as a matter of fact, that's exactly what happens. These four men are successful. Now, of course, in those days, you would vote a ticket, right? There were 4 seats. You would vote for the 4 people you thought that should run. And so you'd have 4 on the opposition, you'd have 4 for the government. Now, obviously, and of course later it would be 4 for the Liberals, 4 for the Conservatives. Obviously, the understanding at the time was that you would vote for the ticket you wanted to win. So instead of, say, kind of mix and match, I'll vote for 3 of one and 1 of the other, or 2 and 2 of each, the understanding was you would vote for a whole ticket. So again, this is what happened. The opposition ticket wins. So, O'Brien and Burchell, Robinson and Tweedy are all going to Fredericton. So they make their victory speeches. Now Robinson's sick; he's not really feeling well, but he does kind of thank the people for the support that they've been given. And Burchell, says, "Hey, those government candidates, they were good guys. They conducted an honorable campaign. I got no complaints against them. But Northumberland County is in a much better position now that we're going." So, Tweedy basically also says the people really stood up for their rights in this election. And, but he does say, hey, listen, we're all friends. You know what I mean? We're all here and we're all trying to do our best. So, government, opposition, we're all miramichiers, I guess, is kind of the idea. But the fact that we're all friends becomes maybe a little bit more apparent than anybody had ever thought on Declaration Day, on the day when the winners are declared, because Andrew Blair is basically put in a pretty precarious position, because his government is going to fall, because the results of this election see his majority in the legislature severely reduced, and to not being a majority at all. So, he's in a position where his government's going to fall. Unless he can convince somebody to cross the floor. Now, he's done this before. As I say, as he built the opposition party in New Brunswick. Because again, at this point, we think, opposition, Liberals, Conservatives. There wasn't really that. Nominally, or I guess essentially, maybe. Blair is a Liberal, Hennington is a Conservative, but they don't identify that way, and we don't understand them in quite that way yet. That's going to come, but it's not quite there yet. So you have like a more liberal party and a more conservative party, but they're not really understood as big L liberal, big L conservative, or big C conservative at this time. So that's a note on parties. But so he's built up. He's built governments on defections from the other side before. And he decides this is what he's going to try to do again. He is going to try to bring these 4 Northumberland representatives into his government. And again, obviously, we would not be talking about a great political scandal known as the Northumberland Deal if he wasn't successful. And he absolutely was. So basically, what happens is Tweedy is said to have led all 4, or I guess his other 3. He didn't lead himself, he brought himself in, but he leads his 3 compatriots into Blair's government. Now, as a reward for kind of leading this defection, Tweedy becomes the Surveyor General. In order to entice the other 3 to come in, basically Blair says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some changes here. We're going to reduce the stumpage rates. We're going to help, lumbering operations around the province, in order to kind of boost that industry. Which, again, since the other 3 guys are major lumber barons in the Miramichi, Burchell and O'Brien both managing their own companies, and Robinson having interest in several companies throughout the region, that's really what, and ostensibly that's what they've gone into the opposition for. That's why they're in opposition to begin with, because they really don't believe that Blair is going to work for the lumber interests in the area, and so this concession suits them. However, as you can well imagine, this causes no end of complaint in the aftermath of its happening. A lot of people feel like, hey, we voted in people in opposition to the government, and what do? They do an about-face, and now they're in the government. What gives? So there are newspaper articles that are pretty clearly denouncing these guys as, being completely two-faced and all of this. However, basically, they look at it, and it turns out they're pretty right that it's early days. We're in now for 4 years. You know what I mean? We have time to kind of change the public's perception of this. In time, the Northumberland Deal is not going to be something that people are going to remember. However, for Tweedy, that's definitely true. For Burchell, that's definitely true. For O'Brien and Robinson, things are a little bit different. Because about a year in July, basically maybe a year and a half, in July 1891, then O'Brien and Robinson received some money from the provincial government because they had incurred extra expenses in the building of the O'Brien Bridge, and they had a claim into the government like, hey, listen, can you help us cover this? And they receive, $10,000 for this. Now, again, you can very easily see why maybe some people feel like, wait a minute, you've defected from, you've crossed the floor, and now you've just received a big payoff. Are those two things linked? Yeah, there's 18 months between them, but still, those two things seem like they're too close together for comfort. So, as a matter of fact, at the same time, there's actually, people are so angry that there is a suit leveled against Robinson and O'Brien, as basically they breached the independence of Parliament, that they were part of a government, and they were, even while being having claims for money against that government. So that was seen as a conflict of interest, and that was seen as a breach of the independence of the legislature, or again, kind of small p Parliament. So these guys are basically charged and are going to be fined $16,000 each. So again, this is it, and the case is brought forward. Some people feel that this is their just desserts. Some people feel that this, since O'Brien and Robinson are clearly going to fight this, and they do, they feel like maybe this is just basically kind of, great for the lawyers and not really for anybody else. So that whole issue kind of goes away as well. Much like the Northumberland Deal, it eventually gets kind of swept away. So by October of 1892, another election is in the wind. So the government doesn't last very long, but they do go back to the polls, and all four men, they're back. And at this point, basically, O'Brien kind of sums it up. I mean, he says, listen, I'm glad, you know what I mean? This more or less proved it. We ran as government candidates and you still voted us in. So, obviously all of this business about the Northumberland Deal, all of this business about, contempt of Parliament or breach of independence, at the end of the day, the electors really didn't feel that was as important. O'Brien, of course, is also celebrating the birth of his first son, John McPeak O'Brien, more commonly known as Mac. So he's in high spirits anyway. But yeah, he basically says that this, that kind of puts a cap on that whole period, because now, I ran again in another election, and we were successful. So that's it. So we move now, I guess, to kind of wrap everything up. Robinson basically goes on to be a representative for a number of years. Eventually moves into the federal parliament, as does Blair, actually. Just to kind of harken back to him, Hannington gives up the opposition mantle and passes it over to Arthur Stockton. So that's it. So Robinson goes on and becomes an MP for a number of years. Tweedy eventually becomes a cabinet, stays in the cabinet, becomes Premier of New Brunswick himself in the early 1900s. Burchell goes into this session that we just finished talking about, coming out of the 1892 election. He's unanimously elected as the Speaker of the House, and he serves, I think, 2 separate stints as Speaker of the House. So obviously that did not impact him with his fellow politicians. It was understood that, people move across the floors in those ways. Even though, like I say, it was a big scandal at the time. It blew over. And John O'Brien would be successful in a third election before eventually retiring from politics, focusing on his business, and unfortunately dying in a very tragic automobile train accident in 1917. So that is the Northumberland Deal, the scandal that rocked the Blair government in its early days coming out of the 1890 election. So I hope that was of some interest to you. We will definitely see you once again to talk about more topics, more history, and like I say, definitely leave all of your comments, your suggestions, questions, if you have them, below. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.